Hi everyone, welcome to new episode with Finance with Alex. I'm your host Alex. So today I'm going to be talking about the topic of inflation. So what is inflation? Inflation is the actual measure of how expensive a set of goods and services become over a certain period of time. It can be measured monthly, quarterly, or on a yearly basis. So the most common measures for inflation in the UK are actually the consumer price inflation index and the retail price inflation index. So the CPI was actually introduced in 1996, and at the time it was called the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, whilst the RPI was actually officially introduced in 1956, and it's actually used by the Office of National Statistics. The main difference between the two is actually that the RPI actually includes housing costs, whilst the CPI doesn't, and both the measures of goods that are and services are used in both baskets, they can actually change on a yearly basis. Obviously, that has to be discussed and reported on. So why is inflation important? Well, inflation is actually important for a number of reasons. First of all, it actually determines, as we mentioned, the price of goods and services. However, and obviously if those goods and services actually increase, it actually is supposed to entice consumers to actually seek higher wages to pay for those increases. It also has an influence on how businesses make decisions, especially in terms of where to build new factories, how many people to hire, um, revenue projections, and all other aspects of running a business, as you can imagine. If inflation is too high, businesses might actually curb their uh, spending patterns, and obviously this could lead to a decrease in GDP, the measure of the economy, and obviously a slowdown in the wider economy as well. It also has a very severe influence in terms of how people actually spend their money. So, for example, let's say you normally buy a premium brand, the price increases quite a lot. What do you do? Well, either you can continue, but that will increase your expenditure, or you can switch to a generic brand, which is a lot of people actually do in this situation. However, there's actually a case where actually inflation can be actually too low. It's actually a negative inflation, which is called deflation, which I'm going to cover in my next episode. So with all these cases of inflation, deflation, where do policymakers come in? Well, the only main policymaker that actually can come in this situation is actually central banks, and they have a number of measures that can actually control inflation. Obviously, I will discuss the main one, which is interest rates. If inflation is going too high, there's expectation for inflation to go high. Policymakers actually increase interest rates so that it actually um, that curbs those projections. But obviously, it's quite difficult, as you can imagine. We've seen it the last few years where we had very high inflation to actually bring it down. It can actually be quite sticky, which economics talk for lasting a long time. Specifically in the case of the UK, there's inflation targeting regime, which is actually set at 2%. However, current interest rates are set at 4.25% because inflation has been quite above the target for a number of years. Um, and also there's actually a case where inflation can actually be too high, and that's actually called hyperinflation. So hyperinflation can be extremely destructive to the wider economy. It basically means that the money that's actually used in the economy actually becomes worthless. So then people cannot actually buy what they want. And in this case, I'm going to discuss three different samples, historical samples. Some are a bit older and one more recent. So the one of the first instances that's actually quite famous and studied quite a lot is the 1923 case in which occurred in Germany. It actually happened because of severe economic circumstances. The government was actually forced to print huge amounts of money to cover workers' wages. However, that actually created a situation where those money and the prices consequently kept decreasing, sometimes twice a day. And to give an example, just in the space of a few months, so if bread cost 250 Deutschmarks in January 1923, in November that same bread cost 200,000 million marks. Just imagine that. Another case that actually occurred was in the case of Hungary just after the end of World War II, which occurred for almost close to a year, from August 1945 to July 1946. Um, to give an example, $1 was actually worth 1,320 pesos beginning of the year. By the end of the year of 1945, $1 was worth 128,000 pesos. The situation got so bad that the government had to introduce a brand new currency called Adopengu, which was worth 6 trillion pesos. That's a huge number, right? In the end, the government was forced to stabilize the situation. They introduced a brand new currency. It's called the forint. It's actually still the official currency of Hungary to this day, and the equivalent was 400,000 quadrillion pesos for one forint. One of the most recent examples of hyperinflation actually occurred from 2006 to 2011. That period was quite famous in the case of Zimbabwe. So the official currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, actually started to decrease quite rapidly in the space of those several years. The cost of goods would actually double every 24 hours. On a month-by-month basis, it actually would increase to 2,600% or 231 million% on a year-by-year basis. So to combat this, the government actually dropped the Zimbabwean dollar as the official currency in the end, and they actually started to use more established currencies such as the US dollar, the British pound, and a few others. So this is the end of my episode of inflation. Obviously, I try to keep it nice and tight. If you feel that I could have covered something else, I could make actually a new episode. So please feel free to like and comment on the episode. Let me know what you think about inflation. What have you seen in terms of inflation? And please feel free to stay in touch. Thank you very much.